And Robert, on that topic, let's go ahead and get into front lines. But I want to talk about this because I'm going to talk about this next item because it really ties into what we just talked about. And there's an interesting interview I read with a socialist professor. He's over at the University of Houston. His name's David McNally. And he commented on the state of socialist and anti-war protest movements in the United States. He said that a multi-year social mobilization in support of Palestine is a possibility if Israel continues their Gaza war into next year. And he cited Israeli officials that said it's not a done deal, but they want to continue this potentially into next year. So I think that's a valid point. Now, McNally said the Biden administration is reigniting anti-war elements. He compared today's anti-war movement to the anti-war movement in the 60s and 70s against Vietnam. But he said they're not quite there yet. He said, quote, the social movements that we have at the moment are not yet adequate to the task. We're going to need many more mass organizing formations. He continues, at some point, if this movement grows, then some kind of large framework that brings together unions, faith organizations, student groups, dissident scholars, and social movement organizers into new organizational rubrics will become possible and necessary. He continues, still, one of these strategic discussions that we're going to need over the next few months on the left in the United States is how we can begin to create broader frameworks for Palestine solidarity and mobilization. Interestingly, he also talks about how this new pro-Palestine movement, unlike Black Lives Matter, is not going to be controlled or influenced by establishment Democrats. He said it's going to be harder to extinguish than the Black Lives Matter movement. Here's exactly what he said. According to McNally, former U.S. President Barack Obama encouraged LeBron James and other basketball players in 2020 to end their strikes. Remember, they said, we're not going to play basketball until these Black Lives Matter demands are met. And Obama was fearing that those protests would hurt Biden's electoral chances. And so McNally talks about how Democrats are not going to be able to do this to this new pro-Palestine movement. He says, quote, the Democrats can't do this now over the issue of Palestine. They can't send Obama or Biden or any Democrat in to kill the movement right now. And I bring this up because Biden's reelection chances are almost certainly the reason behind the lack of national mobilization. We've repeatedly talked about far left movements are still struggling to reactivate, with the exception of two instances, Stop Cop City outside Atlanta, Georgia, and Jane's Revenge, the fire bombings and other vandalism of pro-life clinics across the country. With the exception of those two events, we have not seen in the past roughly for 3 years plus, we have not seen any kind of far left mobilization. And the logical conclusion here is because it looks bad for the Biden administration. It's another domestic crisis for the Biden administration. And so that is why we haven't seen these national level community organizing and mobilization organizations push. And so it's very interesting here to see McNally, and this is really more on the socialist side, so Democratic Socialists of America, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and other groups like that. They're trying to build organizing infrastructure outside of those traditional channels that really have been controlled by the Obama faction of the Democrat Party. And so according to McNally, this seems to be a good opportunity to build that organizing infrastructure. Israel's anticipated campaign into Rafah is likely to be an accelerator of the anti-war movement. I think that's supposed to start this week. The Biden administration is urging Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu not to go into Rafah. And that's going to cause, it's going to be an accelerator domestically. I think we're going to see another round of protests. I think more people are going to join this domestic protest movement. But I think it's unlikely to be a trigger for a national anti-war mobilization. Now, there will be efforts. There have been efforts. We've seen pretty large protests. We've seen some direct action demonstrations like vandalism and arson and just this low-level sporadic type of direct action activity. This is not going to be on the level of 2020, but it is going to be a spike from what we've seen over the past 3 years. And so I bring this up talking about Biden's reelection chances. And really that is, I think, the number one reason why we are not going to see the same type of mobilization that we saw in 2020. It would be detrimental to Biden. Which brings me up to the next point, tying this back into the last item. If the U.S. House in a failed or contested election where there is not the Electoral College declared, has no definitive winner, and the U.S. House, by the Constitution, elects the next president, and it happens to be Donald Trump, then we are going to see those traditional national organizing and mobilization organizations flip the switch, and it is going to be it's going to be a very chaotic several years for sure. And with that, let's finish these last couple of items here on front lines.